So, Professor René Rohrbeck, we just talked before I pressed record about sports, and you mentioned that you did windsurfing, and I thought about it because I also like to use the metaphor of sailing or windsurfing compared to strategic foresight. So you don't know where the wind is going, but you have to get from point A to point B. Do you still have fond memories of windsurfing? Do you still do it a lot? And do you also like to use that kind of metaphors in your work?
That's an interesting reflection. I mean, I think what we see today is that many companies are also feeling like this changing so fast and so fundamental that what is the good of planning, right? And I think as a sailor, as a windsurfer, you kind of accept this as part of reality, that you're dependent on the wind, you're dependent on the waves, you're dependent on forces you can't control, and yet it makes a difference what you do, right? So that's, I think, something which for foresighters is very logic, but it's often in contrast to what a CEO is asked to do, who needs to project certainty, needs to project that he knows where we're going or she knows where we're going. And this is, I think, something which in my practice I see a lot as a tension which is always there.
Yeah, so the tension between short-term and long-term?
Yeah, the tension between, well, if it's not predictable, how can we then go into that space, right? I mean, today, if I would start a car company, probably everyone would think me mad and saying, well, it's so much uncertainty, plus, the Chinese will win the EV game. But actually, when you think about, well, I'm Elon Musk. Well, I'm launching actually a car company, but at the same time, I'm launching a software company. At the same time, I'm launching a technology company, and I'm launching a company which is competing completely differently than other companies, and which presumably are in the same industry. And this type of new disruptive business models is one of the things which a foresighter aims to deliver when working with companies. And so there's this tension between, can I invest if it's not predictable, versus it's not predictable and it's uncertain. So everyone is in the same game, and it's about me, the sailor or the windsurfer, to make best use of this uncertainty. Is a tension which I'm seeing a lot sort of in management and leadership, and we discuss a lot in our EMBA classes with managers who have often already 20 years of very stable environments behind them.
Yeah, and how do these managers respond? Because they are in a whole other ball game, as you can say.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, what we remind them is that when you think about companies, they probably go through 3 phases. The first is really this entrepreneurial phase. You need to discover what can I sell and for whom can I create value and how can I monetize this. And then you have this engineering phase, often the scale-up phase of a startup, where you say, okay, how can I make that scale? Do I need a franchise model? How do I, structure then my production around the world, et cetera, et cetera. And then you often get into this administrative phase. How do I get even more efficient? How do I reduce my cost and so on? So it's quite normal that by the time you're working in a company as a manager, as the CEO, and by the time it is a company which is very much in this administrative phase, it feels very odd to go back to the entrepreneurial phase. And yet many of our companies today need to do exactly that.
Yeah. And do you see examples? You mentioned a couple. Like Tesla, SpaceX, I presume. Do you also have other examples where, because you also have to fight the cultural inertia, like things have always been done here, the way it has been done. We also have systems that are optimized for the administrative task at hand. So do you have examples?
Yeah, many. I mean, as you know, I'm also a consultant, so we have also the chance to work with many companies. We typically have not the chance then to talk about exactly those companies. But what you see, I mean, is that most companies have not anymore like earlier, maybe every 50 years or 30 years, the need to reinvent sort of their business model, but it's getting much shorter this time frame. I think one of the companies I've been following very closely is Bosch, which is 70% sort of car supplier. Of course, they needed to reinvent what is their offerings if the drivetrain is changing from diesel to more gasoline, and then from diesel and gasoline to electric. And what you come to see there is that you need to both understand, well, what is then the new technologies which will make a difference in the new market, which is then electric, but then also to think back, well, is that also shifting the power? And interestingly, that's what we see today with the EV revolution. An EV car is much simpler to build. I'm not going to say that the Peter and René car company can be founded tomorrow and then we have sales the day after tomorrow. But presumably, if we find a nice private equity sponsor, in 3 years' time, we have our first car on the market. And why is that? Because an electric car is a much simpler car. And it has mostly components which are off-the-shelf commodity products. And these type of tectonic shifts in power in the value chain is what is our daily business to make that possible to understand as a company and as a leadership team.
And what's your, let me rephrase the question, because you're a consultant, you also have experience also in large companies from a corporate foresight position, and now you're in academia. So my question was, what's your favorite role? But I think they all benefit from each other. How do you see that for yourself?
Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, if you ask myself what's my favorite role between an academic, a consultant, or somebody working in industry, it probably depends on the time of the day, right? So if I'm in the evening mood, then it's really nice to have this capacity to reflect deep. As an academic is allowed to do, write papers, get also feedback from your colleagues in academia saying that really knew what you're saying. So I'm really valuing these moments of deep thinking. When I'm leaping out of bed and in the morning, I really like industry because, it's about, again, we need to make these decisions. We need to bring the teams behind what we want to achieve. We need to cascade maybe that also through the organization. And in the middle of the day, I'm actually really happy to be a facilitator of this as a consultant, right? And say, well, I'm seeing you right now with your industry at a pivotal moment. There's a couple of options. Once the company choose the options, then we can help to implement that, to cascade this understanding through the different business units of an organization. So I'm feeling myself quite lucky that I don't need to choose, actually.
Yes, I can imagine. One of the main reasons I wanted to talk to you is your seminal paper with Menis et Koen from 2018. And I think the paper is among futurists as a sort of iconic state, because it's about that corporate foresight can lead to higher profitability and also a higher growth rate. Can you tell me, can you share something about the project and also why it's one of the few research initiatives that has been done on this topic?
Yeah, right. I mean, I'm not surprised that it's being used a lot, because everyone today, including foresighters, get asked, "What is your ROI of the work you're doing for me today?" Right?
Yeah.
And that is quite simple if you're in sales, right? You're saying, "Well, actually today I called a couple of clients, and tomorrow I've got some signed contracts." If you're a foresighter, you are in the space together with strategists, you're together with investors who are in for the long game. So the question is really, how can I measure a return on investment on foresight? And it's actually a quite hard nut to crack also from a research perspective. It's similarly to when we do longitudinal studies for our health, right? I mean, what good will it do if I'm eating very healthy every morning and every lunch and every dinner? Well, in the short term, it makes no difference, but in the midterm it does, and in the long term, it really does. It makes you live longer and healthier and happier and more active. So we've been able to do this in empirical research for our health, but in organizations we often take cross-sectional samples, as we call it. So you're asking at the same time, are you doing foresight and are you doing good? And that actually shows you often the inverse correlation between those two factors, foresight and firm performance. And that might feel odd, but when you start thinking about it, it is actually very reasonable. You can think about yourself also. If you 5 years ago graduated with a PhD in software engineering from Stanford University, it's probably not the first thing you think when you come out with your diploma. When will this value of this diploma expire, right? I mean, the first thing you're thinking, should I join Google or Meta or somebody else? And how do I make the most money because everyone wants to hire me? And the same is true for organizations. If you are successful and you're not thinking necessarily deep enough about your future, except if you build a proper routine to do it. And of course, investors, they want companies to build such a routine. So in the German Aktiengesetz, there's even a paragraph which says every company listed on the stock exchange need to have strategic foresight.
Aktiengesetz is the law.
That is actually the law, right?
Okay.
And interestingly, it means, in my investors report every year, I'm publishing something. So it's clear that we need to go to some longitudinal type of study. So essentially, we as researchers, we need first to assess, well, how good is an organization systematically in doing foresight? And then we need to wait. And here we choose to wait actually 7 years. And over those 7 years, we tracked organizations. We tracked their finance. We tracked also their strategic moves. And there, as you say, there's a couple of things which stick out. One thing we were interested in is how likely is it if you are what we call a vigilant company to be among the outperformers, the top 20% in profitability in your industry? And turns out, if you're a vigilant company, well, that's 44% that you're among the top 20 in your industry. So that was already quite interesting. Then we wanted to compare also across industry. Is there a general benefit of being vigilant vis-a-vis others? It turns out that vigilant companies have a 33% higher profitability. And then the real question, which as a foresighter you believe your ROI is highest, is if you are able to help companies to make really bold strategic moves, which then also pay off, right? Ideally pay off all the time. Maybe it's not all the time, but in a sample of companies, you should then find that on average, you help actually companies to do that, and they're successful because of that. And it turns out that this is also the indicator which shows the strongest. So when you look at the effect of valuation of organizations, so their value from an investor's perspective, then they outgrow their average sample rivals by 200%. So in other words, they actually grow 3 times as fast. And that is something which we then investigated also further. What are these strategically meaningful moves? And turns out that in many industries, we could identify companies which adopted a completely new business approach. So, for example, a pharmaceutical company which went all in on digitalization and digital health monitoring ahead of everyone else. They saw this technological wave coming. They said, can I ride it? And then they did. Right? They invested into new technology. They bought some startup companies. And then they were ahead of everyone else in going into this digital health space. So that's why, yes, it is not only very promising to invest into strategic foresight, but we were able to show that it has also a huge effect for the capacity of an organization to go ahead of others, be ahead of the curve, and have then also superior performance in growth and profitability.
Yeah, and you also identified a couple of dimensions for companies to be, how do you say it, mature in their corporate foresight. Can you elaborate on them? I remember it's about sensing information, about the methods, about the culture. But yeah, please, what are all the dimensions?
Sure. So I mean, when I look back, sort of how we came up even with the model, when I was a young graduate, then working at Deutsche Telekom, the question was, our market is changing very fast, and are there other companies which have systematic ways?
Can I interject? That's a question that came up. Why did you start with corporate foresight, or was it a question from Deutsche Telekom?
Yeah, so I got actually interested in strategic foresight when I was working at Deutsche Telekom. And the question really was, we are in a market which will be disrupted through liberalization, through new players entering, through IP networks, etc. And is there good ways of preparing for new market opportunities? And that was the initial spark of saying, how do companies actually do that? Looking ahead, anticipating change, coming back to the present day and say, what are the meaningful decisions I need to take right now? And indeed, so that was basically the start also of realizing there's actually not so much out there. Most companies, they do this in an ad hoc basis when they're already challenged, which is maybe already too late. And I then changed tactics a bit and said, well, let me collect good practices and try to take the different good practices together and design a model out of it. And on the sort of high level, which we call the process level, we have our 3 Ps. So we talk about, well, a company needs to be able to go in a circle around perceiving change drivers, to understanding, prospecting, and to understanding how they might develop and what futures could look like. And then probe into those futures with venturing activities, classical research and development, but also with market testing and looking at lead markets, how products and services are being developed there and how the market is responding to them. And then sort of inside, we wondered, well, what are the things you need to have as underlying capabilities? And we have 6 capabilities there today. We can also go through them, but as you know, there's also a good way of sort of testing this for yourself at home, so to speak. We have actually launched last year together with the World Economic Forum a self-assessment tool, which is free to use and which creates a little PDF for you where you can benchmark against our database and against companies in your industry and beyond your industry. So there's a couple of sort of capabilities which I can also go in if you want me.
I will share the link for viewers or listeners to fill it in themselves. I'm curious, from these 6 dimensions, what do you see is the most difficult for organizations to develop or to maintain?
Yeah, so I think when I started with this, and I have to remind myself that this is some time ago, so I think it's this year probably the 20th birthday of my maturity model, so I should light a couple of candles soon. But what we've seen sort of in the past is that information, insights, intelligence was the bottleneck. And that is mostly not true anymore. Although we're now getting sometimes buried in so much bad data that it sort of becomes an issue again. So what we call information usage and method sophistication were things which we sort of almost parked already and say, well, most companies have that fixed. But through AI, you get this sense of knowing, and you actually have the opposite often, that you get something from an AI tool, which is a very high level pass of data. And in order to get much better insights, and also insights which are competitively relevant vis-a-vis your your rivals. You need actually to go to much more sophisticated data and be very conscious about what you do. So it used to be something which felt done, but it's re-emerging as something organizations need to think deeply also about. Who is presenting which data, produced with which tool, what kind of methods did we use to check, etc. What is true since a couple of years is that organizations typically have a huge problem at legitimizing meaningful action. It's straightforward if you want an additional marketing budget for your company because you show me your sales numbers and I give you some more money and then you do some more sales and that feedback loop helps us to always give you more money. But if you say, well, it's actually uncertain how AI will play out in the text industry, for example, then everyone says, yeah, that's true. And that means that I need to really think about, well, what are my potential strategies going into an AI-based text business? What does it look like? What do native text companies who are AI native, how do they operate? What business models do they have? And that remains a huge bottleneck, both in terms of attention. So how much time do they simply allocate to this as a top management team? And also with what kind of methods? Today we are capable of delivering probably in 1, 2, 3 weeks a very thorough research on what are the change drivers impacting you in the next 5 years? What are the plausible scenarios which you need to prepare for? How would they look quantitatively for you? And for us as Foresight, this is amazing, right? Before this was easily a 1-year project and you would go back and forth.
So to interject, you can now do it with AI.
You can do it with AI, but not with the easy button, but with sort of a tight human activity. And the way we do it is we have always one, which is sort of the AI colleague, but the actual project remains sort of 100% in human ownership. But it's really this prospecting, this middle, which was difficult. On the probing, companies got much bolder, is our perspective, at least the companies we work with. They're much faster at taking decisions for mergers and acquisition deal, for selling part of their company, buying another part, and so on. That is sort of more trained in, I would say. But this initial anticipation, reflection, what are the consequences? What are the cascading consequences? Also, what is the end game in our industry? That is something which companies still struggle with, and it's good for us because we can help them, but it's also something you don't need all the time as a company.
Yeah, so it's mostly the middle part, so not the information coming in, but mostly making sense, using methods like scenario planning or backcasting or other things. And then the last part, the taking actions, that there you see a surge of boldness, like you just mentioned.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in on this first part again, because for me as a researcher who is trained with how to use data, how to use methods and so on, it's particularly striking how difficult it is for somebody who's now getting help from AI to get on top of their own analysis again. And that is something which I anticipate is going to be probably a huge market, if you want, for us, both in executive education and also in consulting. But it's a huge problem for everyone who's in a leadership position, that you have the sense that you're dealing with trustworthy data, and in reality you don't, because you have not controlled your AI process enough.
Yeah, so you said, just to make sure that I understand you, that you should really make sure that the data on which you're inferring action or doing your analysis, that it's good data, that is correct. Do you mean that part of your work?
Yeah, it's in reality it's often more than that. There goes a lot of sort of new craftsmanship into the joint work with an AI. Mm-hmm. Essentially today, most of us will use AI in one way or another. And one thing which we find always very surprising is that every AI tool will eventually, after done a lot of work, and sometimes you wait an entire day for it to come back, and then it disclaims that everything it says could be wrong. Right? So, I mean, imagine I'm hiring somebody who tells that to me. Sorry, right? I mean, I wouldn't be able to hire somebody like that. But today we're kind of fine with this. And we're running currently a community of practice with a number of large multinational companies on the use of AI for foresight, innovation, and strategy. And one of the participants says, well, you know what? I think the most boring thing I can think about is checking the output of AI. But it feels like this is the only way that you can use an AI, because everything can be a hallucination or could be, just an artifact of a made up data because the AI tries for you to fill the hole in your data. And the trick is actually not to try to read everything 100 times and do then the hard manual work of checking everything the AI told you, but being hard on it in the throughput, so in the method it applies, in its data handling. So there's a lot of skills which go into this to say, okay, I'm going to prompt already in such a hard-coded way that the tool cannot escape, that it will have to read all the words in all the reports I'm feeding into the tool, and it will only come back with insights which have been validated in at least 4 of those reports. And little hacks like this are extremely important. And my biggest fear is that in 2 years' time, all companies will realize that they have been building bad AI output on bad AI output on fabricated and synthetic data, and now we can not believe in anything anymore. So it's also a matter of where you store your data, where you store your intelligence, which will matter going forward.
Yeah, what I think is really interesting that you mentioned that it's also related to your foresight quality. Like you said, where you store it, how you can access it, etc. Yeah. René, I'm doing a lot of myself, and this is of course also a way for me to ask you all kind of questions, sort of scratching my own itch. But I'm also doing consulting work or keynote presentation also for government organizations in the Netherlands or public institutions. So I wondered concerning your paper and corporate foresight. Do the same dimensions also apply to government organizations?
Yeah, I mean, we see a renewed interest sort of in public in the public domain. I think the most striking quote recently was from Friedrich Merz, so the German chancellor in Davos. He basically opened his speech by saying, it is strategic foresight which China used to become a world power in the last 2 decades. Sort of acknowledging, on the one hand, the power of anticipation, the power of, in a way, I mean, I grew up in West Berlin, where we were sort of brought up in a sense where we were laughing at sort of the Russian side and saying they do these 5-year plans and they achieve always the plans, but in reality, nothing happens and the economy is going very, very bad. And for me, when I was listening to Friedrich Merz, I realized he is very much in this moment of awakening of market-based democracies, of saying we always get great outcomes if there's many people doing different things uncoordinated, but then guided by the market, right? That's a belief in which I was also brought up. And here he stands in Davos in front of everyone and acknowledges that actually this kind of orchestration plus state influence plus anticipation is much more powerful. And I think he is not just saying this as a lone voice. there's many governmental bodies which we have talked to, have links with, and so on, who say we need to come to a new balance of market-based forces, competition, innovation, but also this what, from a French perspective, you would call a bit this dirigiste approach of guiding and then of making sure that we come together as an orchestra of private companies, governments, in order to face the big challenges like the energy transition, like safeguarding biodiversity, safeguarding equality in our societies, or rather advancing it again. So I think, governmental organizations, they come from a different past, but many are waking up to this new role they need to have in order to really guide the market, guide the outcomes we want to have.
Yeah, and that's also related to the center you are now working for. Is that correct?
Right. I mean, even though I have to say, I'm director of the Center for Net Positive Business here at EDEC. In addition to my chair. And what we're doing there is still very much in this market economy logic, right? We're working less with governments and much more with private companies with whom we identify what we call catalytic business models, right? So if we want to make sure that we get back to our track towards reaching our climate objectives in 2030 and 2050 in Europe, well, we need, for example, to renovate the park of existing buildings in Europe. And we're way too slow, right? It's a difference between 1% renovation rate today and 3%, which we need to have. So what we're interested in is to understand what are the catalytic business models which can make that happen. And luckily there are entrepreneurs who are using AI, who are using smart financial instruments in order to accelerate this. One of the companies which we looked into quite deeply is NPAL in Germany. It's the first sort of green unicorn, which is using a lot of sort of just maturing technologies in order to make this process of turning your house into an electrically powered house possible and predictable and investable, also even from a bank perspective. So these kind of business models we're very interested in.
Yeah, but there's a sort of course, a similarity or combination with the foresight practice, because what's the urgency in companies to become more bio-positive? So it's not most of the times not shareholder value. Is there a sort of similarity between both domains? How do you see that?
Between net positivity and foresight? Yeah, I mean, we to an extent, we come, of course, as foresight is equipped with our methodology, and we try to apply it in the sustainability space. So on my bolder days, I would say, we part of sustainability 2.0, right? Sustainability 1.0 was I'm trying to do what I used to do, but I'm trying to reduce the harm I'm causing to the common good, to the environment, etc. And that is something which works well in boom times. So the last couple of years and maybe even decades, we often trace back to the Paris Climate Agreement, which is now 11 years in the past. It kind of worked well because companies were able to invest and just reduce slightly their profitability. But in times of economic crisis in which we are now, all these efforts can quickly collapse if you're not moving towards sustainability 2.0. And in our mind, this is, thinking about, well, how can we transform also on the systems level a industry in a way that we come back into planetary boundaries and back onto the path towards our climate agreements. And the only sort of, not the only probably, but the biggest hope for us is really to do this with industrial means and do it with the means of catalytic business models, as we like to call them. So business models which can transform the entire industry to the better.
It's really interesting and also curious to see also the latest developments over there. I want to segue again a little bit back to the corporate foresight part, because question I get asked a lot, like if our organization, for example, in a small or medium enterprises, do not have a dedicated foresight team, what can I do as an individual to become more future ready?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, many things. I mean, there's probably two parts to it. One is the thinking, and the other is the perceiving, as we would call it. I think the first thing which you learn as a futurist is that you need to be able to listen to dissonance. You need to listen to things you don't know yet, and that's very hard, because it's generally true for our psychology that whatever we don't know, we also don't see, right? Because our mind is wired this way, that everything which is noise is being crowded out by everything we need for survival, or for driving our car, or for going to work, or performing well in sports. So the first thing is that you need to say, I need to bring myself into the state of mind and expose to sources of insights which I don't normally go. So that's why we go to, theaters. We go maybe on travels to very remote places, or I'm hitchhiking through China, or whatever it is, to expose yourself to things which you will find are new to you, and where you have also the time to reflect on why are they new, what do they mean for me, are they relevant to my business, and what are the consequences for my business. So that's something which you can actually learn. We also train people. We have executive education formats, and it's also a little toolbox of hacks of how to do that properly. And the second thing, which I find always very interesting, there's actually a little article on that out on LinkedIn. I think I posted it, where COVID was just about to start. And I was sitting in a restaurant and getting our food and so on. And it was one day before the lockdown, literally in Paris. I need to pick up my passport. And the owner of the restaurant, is serving his guests and so on, but he's really not in a good mood. And I'm saying, hey, well, what's your problem? He said, well, it's a lockdown. I don't know what I'm going to do. Right? And what do you do? I say, well, I'm a university professor, so I also don't exactly know how it's going to play out, because students cannot come to the campus and so on. They said, yeah, what do you do as a professor? I have no idea, probably not much. And I said, well, I help people think about their business under uncertainty. So he says, okay, well, I've got time because I'm going to close my restaurant. Can I invite you to another glass of wine? And we talk a little bit about my business. Do you mind? And I didn't mind. So I took out my little iPad and said, okay, well, that is a 3-step thing, right? We think about what are the key uncertainties which are hitting you. So we draw a 2x2 matrix, do a little scenario. And I say, and then it's about the critical levers you still have in your hands. What are the strategic choices you can make? So we draw those up. And then we say, well, in those different scenarios, how would your different strategies play out? And which one would you choose? And said, yeah, okay, well, I want to choose this one. So eventually not closing down completely and living on taxpayers' money. I want to stay open, but I cannot stay open as a restaurant. So I'm going to do home delivery, and I'm going to do serving people in the car. That's still allowed, and in this way I can keep some of my people employed, not the waitresses, unfortunately, but the cook and so on. So it was a 1-hour conversation where you basically went all the way from, it's so much uncertainty that I'm really depressed and I don't know what to do, to, there's actually different strategies, and I'm actually understanding now how to choose. And I'm also realizing that it's partly beyond my control, but in the realm of control, I can take these decisions of keeping my kitchen open and closing the restaurant and putting my waitresses on furlough. And so, this is what I'm keep telling also small companies, that it is probably even better if you build these type of routines, maybe also with external help of Peter, for example. But it's sometimes having a larger unit is actually even more problematic because then they have their own special and specialized expert territory, which doesn't work so well with the business unit. So it's better to build these routines and these method skills yourself.
Yeah, and I think also I really like the story, the anecdote, because I can also imagine, because I imagine that you are working a lot with large companies, and now you're sitting across a restaurant owner and also being able to help him with this issue at hand. So thanks for sharing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the good red wine must have helped.
René, are there things we've missed you still like to say when we get to a close?
No, I just enjoyed the conversation very much. I mean, it's always, of course, easy for me to talk about foresight because I'm very passionate about the transformative power of foresight. As you also know, I'm also running here our UNESCO chair, where we integrated in this Futures Literacy Network of the UNESCO, which has then also the mission of helping countries around the world, including sort of what we call the Global South, to get more into anticipatory policy making. And I think one thing which your listeners can think about, I mean, we see, for example, with Donald Trump, an erratic president, right? Which daily something seems to happen, another tweak is happening and so on. And at the same time, the people who wrote the programs for the presidency, they're actually long-term thinkers, and they have a particular future in mind, and they're working without pause on making this happen. So it's something which, for us, for all of us, is this challenge, right? You're getting these events coming your way all the time, and yet the real problem is the tide moving. It's these slow movements, which can be intentional, and in the US they are very intentional. And if you don't, are aware of this, then you would fight every little wave, and that's something which we can see on the personal level, which we of course work with organizations to help. What is the end game when AI, when digitalization comes to my industry, and that's of critical importance if you want to stay successful in business, to be able to understand these tides and understand the consequences of these tides moving in.
Yeah. Well, I like that we go full circle. We started with windsurfing and surfing, and now the reference to tides, and so that's I don't know if that was intentional. Yeah. René, I will put the links that you mentioned, and also where can people find more information about you and your work?
Yeah, I mean, you can seek me also out on LinkedIn. This is probably where we are sort of the most active to also share what we're up to. And then there's, of course, also from the edX Business School, you will find our Center for Net Positive Business. You will find our Chair for Foresight, Innovation and Transformation, where also our executive education activities are happening. And also out there in the business world. So more than happy to also respond to other questions you might have.
Yeah, thank you very much. Or should I say danke zeer or merci beaucoup? What do you prefer?
Tak for nu, as the Danish would say. That I always like. They're always very clear, very fast.
Well, tak for nu.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, for having me.